good afternoon, everybody. Hi, my name is Ricardo Correa, and I'm the head of digital currencies here at R3, and I'm joined by my colleague, Austen Appleby, who helps drive our digital currencies initiatives. So we're going to talk to you today about CBDCs and digital currencies generally in R3. We're going to be walking you through some of the work that we've done. We're also going to give you a little bit of a demo of an exciting platform that we've launched on CBDCs as well. So to get us started, first of all, what is CBDCs? Some of you may have seen this flower, the money flower from the BIS. It's a taxonomy of money, shows us the different forms of money. And CBDCs, highlighted there in gray in the middle of the picture, is really central bank issued digital money. So it's denominated in the national unit of account and is really a third form of money alongside cash and reserves. So CBDC would contain the same full faith and credit of the issuing central bank, much like cash. And it would facilitate the digital access to central bank money and enable a whole bunch of new and innovative use cases that we've been exploring. So what's been happening over the last several years is that we've seen an acceleration of CBDC activity across the central banks for various reasons. We've seen the announcement of Libra, now DM. We've, of course, the pandemic has resulted in a much lower use of cash, and there's other geopolitical initiatives globally that has really accelerated the research and development of CBDCs. So from 2019, really lots of research mainly, a little bit of development, and then moving into 2021, where we've started to see the first launch of some CBDCs, Bahamas being the first country to really have a full production CBDC. But of course, we're also aware of the digital yuan, as well as the project going on in Cambodia, which are both in pilot. But really the Bahamas being the first to launch a full production CBDC, which they called Sand Dollar. And as you can see, there's other pockets of development going on in a much more accelerated fashion. Here too, some graphs from the BIS showing that research is now progressing from kind of research and development into POCs and pilots. So lots more activity going on. And again, an acceleration here on the right of engagement in CBDCs, where we see now over 85% of central banks now really exploring CBDCs in full force. So our work at R3 started back in 2016 with the Bank of Canada Project Jasper, looking at domestic PVP and DVP, so that's payment versus payment and delivery versus payment. Also touched on cross-border PVP, which is one of the hottest use cases today in 2021. So from Jasper, we moved across to Austen with the Monetary Authority of Singapore in 2017. A really tremendous body of work by the MAS and a whole bunch of participants and partners across 5 phases of work, exploring many different avenues, many different use cases, and also different technologies, of course. This isn't just going to be one technology to rule them all, but we expect a number of different technologies that'll be able to support CBDCs. From Austen to Inthenon, project in Thailand, again, very exciting. And then across into Hong Kong, and then a collaboration between Lion Rock and Inthenon, actually, in another cross-border project in phase 2 there, as you see, under Lion Rock. And then arguably one of the most exciting retail CBDC projects with the Bank of Sweden, of course, their motivation there being the fact that cash usage in Sweden has dropped below 1%. And so the cost to serve cash becoming really expensive, and really looking at the alternative being a digital form of the e-krona. So this project is now in its 2nd year of development and continues to really look at the impact of deploying a retail CBDC while still trying to maintain the market infrastructure for the most part, but more innovation coming out of the e-krona in the next 12 to 24 months. The Bank of France as well last year kicked off a really exciting project more in the cross-border DVP space. That project continues today. Lots of development with the Bank of France and its partners. We expect to see a lot more announced in the next several months as this project continues to evolve. But here, really exciting to start to really look at, the notion of cross-border currencies and assets and the settlement of these things in heterogeneous environments. And then moving further south, if you like, into South Africa with Project Coca, and really looking at both domestic wholesale, CBDCs on various technologies, and looking at kind of the interoperability of these technologies. And interoperability is something that we'll talk about in a little bit more detail. So what is the impact of CBDC on commercial banks? So, lots of different discussions going on around CBDCs and the issuance of CBDCs by the central bank. One of the biggest concerns, I suppose, is the draining of deposits from the commercial bank to the central bank if the central bank was to issue CBDCs directly into the retail sector. For the most part, we see a lot of the central banks looking at a two-tiered model, but just to ensure that we're clear on kind of the impact. So, there's both positive and negative, I suppose. There's benefits for central banks, reducing friction in the current system, reducing the amount of cost for reconciliation, and of course looking at cross-border payments and the efficiency of cross-border payments, lowering collateral requirements. So liquidity management certainly has a lot of potential, broadening access and the range of services for cash, and increasing customer base. But there is a risk or perceived risk, the potential disintermediation of the banking system, as I talked about. Of course, the technology is still new, so making sure that it's fully resilient, secure, and is able to perform at retail levels. We hear numbers of up to 100,000 requests per second required at retail, and some technologies in the DLT CBDC space slowly getting to those points, but more work to be done. Regulation, public policy, so still unclear in terms of the guidelines for central bank digital currencies and also stable coins, although we do see some movement towards starting to provide some guidance, but a lot more to be done there. And then the miscalibration or the uncertainty of government involvement. And so lots of different organizations, including the BIS and the IMF, looking at, where does the central bank participate? How do they participate, etc. So just a few key considerations around the commercial bank side. In terms of our work, so last year we've done, as you saw earlier, 5 years of research and development with some of the largest central banks in very heavy lifting RFPs. Last year we kicked off a CBDC working group in order to start to drive the conversation to some sort of a conclusion where we could build some capability to accelerate the work that central banks are doing around the world. So we kicked off a working group last year in July. We attracted around 320 odd professionals, 140 organizations, with a really good balance of public and private sector. Really, the opening session was keynoted by the IMF, talking about the need of the public and private sector to come together to make this real. So of those 140 organizations, a really good balance of public and private sector debate. We had over 50 subject matter experts from around the world come and talk to us. And today we have around 30 experts that are continuing to help us on the deliverables that we've started to launch in 2021, and you'll see some of those in a minute. So our knowledge series that we ran last year covered technical impact and policy. We had 22 sessions in total, and we covered a whole bunch of subjects, as you can see on the screen here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but really what we felt were the most important aspects of CBDC to debate. And so the deliverables, this gives you a sense of the structure of the working group. As I mentioned, technical impact and policy, really driving towards a set of deliverables this year that could further help accelerate the work going on in CBDC. So some research, so you see documentation in the form of research, toolkits, reference architectures, and more excitingly, a sandbox that we launched about 6 weeks ago now on private preview with some of the members of the working group, and Austen will do a demo of our sandbox in a minute. So just to talk about our program and what we're working on this year. So as I mentioned, we are in private preview, some of our deliverables. Just to run down the page: research, reference architectures, toolkits, assessment toolkits, and our sandbox, which you see highlighted here. We launched it in private preview. We will be opening up the sandbox to general availability in July, and Austen will talk a little bit more about some of those features when he does the demo. So we do have wholesale and retail capability that we'll be supporting in the sandbox. Today, the sandbox supports the wholesale leg, and once we launch in July, we'll start working on the retail side. We'll also have stablecoin support. We have an SDK that we'll launch in order to extend the capabilities in the sandbox. And then interoperability is something that we're very, very focused on. And interoperability arguably is one of the key technical challenges for us as an industry to solve. So today, when you do have a look at this demo of the sandbox, you will see a step towards solving some of those key technical issues. And what R3 has been doing in that space has been really looking to solve interoperability in 3 stages. Here you'll see the cross-notary atomic swap, which Austen will demonstrate. We'll also be working on cross-network. So this is 2 independent quarter networks being able to interoperate and facilitate a cross-atomic swap. And then towards the Q3 timeframe 2021, we'll be demonstrating cross-ledger atomic swaps. So this is quarter to other ledgers and being able to facilitate real-time settlement across ledgers. So the one thing to keep in mind as we move towards production of CBDCs is R3 will be following an open core strategy, meaning that today we've come to market with quarter enterprise and quarter open source. But as we move towards the issuance of CBDCs and stablecoins, an open core strategy becomes important. Why? Because the issuers typically will require access to the source code to be able to actually audit the software that issues their currency. So our open core strategy will ensure that within the open core itself, we'll be able to support the entire life cycle of the asset from definition to issuance to transfer, transact, redeem, and destruction. So pretty exciting to see that launch as well. So in terms of the research center, this is an open research center that's available to everyone. It's a website that is on R3. We have 2 modules that we've dropped: the conceptual model and design choices for CBDC. We have upcoming modules in the form of use cases, security settlement, cross-border, and general purpose payments as well. So do look out for those modules that are launching. By all means, this research is all open and public. So that's a body of work that we're pretty proud about. The reference architecture toolkits is another piece of work that we're pretty excited about. This toolkit is available for members who participate in the working group and in the sandbox. It's an extension of the work done by the BIS, where the BIS released a few models for us to think about CBDC. And here we've extended this model, and we have a toolkit that very quickly helps reason around what architectures make sense to build depending on a set of questions. Is it a central bank liability? Is it a single or multi-tier solution? Is it a peer-to-peer finality? Is it a bearer asset or a balance sheet asset? Et cetera, et cetera. So pretty exciting. We have an interactive demo that we can share. Please do reach out to us if you'd like to learn more about the reference architecture toolkit. And just before we jump into the sandbox itself, just to give you a quick overview of what it is, the sandbox that we've built is a technical sandbox. You can pop the hood off it and you can actually look at the internals of the sandbox. You can look at the code. It's a proof of concept as a service platform. We have wholesale and retail transaction networks. We have a full testing suite. We will be supporting stable coins, as I mentioned, in an SDK. So wholesale functions support, as you see there, issuance, redemption, transactions. We have a whole bunch of accessibility controls, programmability, which Austen will show you. I don't want to steal his thunder, but I suppose just to give you a view of what's on the right-hand side. Today, the sandbox is a single player mode sandbox. When we launch in July, it will be a multiplayer sandbox. And by the time we get to August, September, it'll be a global player mode, which will allow individual domestic sandboxes to connect together in order to facilitate cross-border use cases. So with that said, let me hand over to Austen. And Austen, over to you to do a demo.
The demonstration of this sandbox is primarily for two things. One is to show the impact CBDC on DLT might have in your region, but also how intuitive it can be to learn about CBDC and how it operates. So when you first enter the sandbox, you'll be prompted with a video that is one of our front-end engineers explaining kind of why and where everything is in the sandbox to get you acquainted with how to use it. Now, at the end of this video, he'll guide you to what we're calling the sandbox guide. Now, this is going to take you through the entire asset lifecycle and teach you exactly what that means. So that's definition of a CBDC, issuance, several types of transactions between the wholesale banks, and ultimately redemption and destruction. So if we click through the first two intro steps, we'll see I define a CBDC asset. And if we click on that, we see some more acute directions on how to do that. So what we're going to do today is demonstrate the definition and issuance of a CBDC. So clicking on our CBDC manager and then define a CBDC type, we can here give a name, and for this case, we'll give it a test3 CBDC and a decimal place. So in this case, we're going to choose 2, because that's the standard for cash. However, this is fully configurable. So after we name and give our asset a decimal place, we're going to enter the programmability stage of defining our asset. Now, it's a broad consensus among the public and private sectors that programmability is one of the major benefits of a CBDC. And in the sandbox, we allow you to test 4 different stages of programmability. The first of which is selecting a notary. Now, the notary is going to authenticate and validate the CBDC and its transactions. And in this case, our central bank controls both of these notaries. So we'll choose one for the purpose of the demo. Now, going into our second level of programmability, we have member access controls. So these are designed as a hard stop to your KYC and AML processes. So if you click yes here on this member access, the issuer, in this case the central bank, has the ability to approve, deny, and revoke access to this asset. What that means is that the issuer has full control over who can custody and transact with this asset at all times and in real time. Next, to our third level of programmability, we have transaction controls. So if we click on add a control here, we'll see some examples. The first of which is maximum value. Again, the issuer can select a value in which no transactions can go above between wholesale banks. Secondly, we can also add a little bit more control for the central bank and set a maximum value without the issuer signing. For the purpose of the demo, we're going to go with maximum value and we'll set it to 1 million. Finally, in our fourth level of controls, or of programmability rather, we have asset controls. So we click on add a control, we have expiry and maximum usage count. What's happening here is after a certain amount of time or number of instances that this CBDC asset is used, the old CBDC will be destroyed and reissued. Now, the purpose of this is also to give the issuer more visibility into where the asset is at any given time, as the central bank does not have visibility into the transactions on the network. However, we'll be able to see who they reissue to at any if there is a maximum usage count or expiry selected. But for the purpose of this demo, we actually do not need these, and we'll go to next to confirm our definition. So here we see our name, our decimal, as well as several compliance controls that we've added. Now, once we submit this to the network, you'll see that your guide automatically prompts you to do the next step. And we can also see, for those of you that are more technical, under the hood of the interface. So we click on what happened on Corda here, and we'll be given several forms of documentation. In this case, we have a video that has a lead engineer explaining the controls that I just went over and what they mean at a technical level. We can also see a high-level diagram or a more in-depth Corda flow sequence that references databases and provides short sentences on what that means. Now, to get even into more depth, we can see here in the dedicated documentation site snippets of code, their definitions, and how to use them. So going back into our sandbox, what have we just done? Well, we've defined an asset and we've basically projected it to the network. So now jumping to the wholesale bank node, I can go to my CBDC manager and I'll be able to see all the assets that are now defined on the network. Here's our test 3 CBDC. If I click on compliance controls, I can see that there is member access enabled. So now I know I can't actually custody or transact with this asset unless I have a member access state. So that's what we'll do. We'll request a member access state from the central bank. We're clicking on request access here, choose our asset, and send the request through to the central bank. So going back to the central bank, we can click on incoming requests and approve this request. Upon the approval of this request, we'll be able to issue some CBDC to this wholesale bank. So we see the request for this particular asset and we approve that. Now, as I mentioned previously, the central bank also has the ability to push access onto any wholesale bank on their network. So for example, a central bank wants to give access to the 10 largest commercial banks in their region for an asset with a particular set of rules. Say the maximum value of transfer is set to a much higher number than that of maybe a tier 2 CBDC. So here we're going to push our issuance to one of the wholesale banks on the network, and it's easy as that. Additionally, if we, as the central bank or as the issuer of an asset, we can view all of the member access states on the network, and if we think that an actor may be acting maliciously, we can revoke that access in real time as well. So let's get some CBDC in our bank account. Going back to wholesale 1, then to CBDC manager, we can select request CBDC. And here's a demonstration of the pledging process. So as you can see, we have $1 billion in bonds here. And it's important to note that we're using bonds as collateral for the simulation. However, any high quality liquid asset or even central bank reserves could be used in a transaction like this, and that functionality is being added in the future. So here we can select our asset, test CBDC, next, and decide how much we want. So in this case, we'll ask for 100 million and send the request through to the central bank. Jumping back to the central bank, and again to our incoming requests, we're going to just quickly approve this request and then see what we can do between central banks, or between wholesale banks rather. So we see our request coming in, we'll click down and we'll approve this. At this time, the bonds are being transferred from the wholesale bank to the central bank, and subsequently the test 3 CBDC is entering the wholesale bank's treasury. So I think we'll take a quick look at that in our treasury at this time, and then we'll see what else we can do with this asset. So here we have our test 3 CBDC, and there's 100 million. Now, finally, going back into our CBDC manager, we see several things we can do. We can transfer the CBDC to another wholesale bank. That is, we can elect to push it, or we can elect to request any kind of CBDC that we have access to in any amount that's allowed. Secondly, we can request a DVP transaction. So in this case, we can offer a certain amount of bonds for a certain amount of any type of asset. In this case, it's a CBDC. However, you can get creative. Finally, and referring to the interoperability problem, we've already begun to solve this problem with a cross-notary swap. So if you remember from the beginning of our definition, we selected notary 1. However, we can also make a transaction between an asset that's validated and authenticated on notary 1 with a different asset that's authenticated and validated on notary 2. Now, keep in mind, this is a small step in the direction of what eventually will be the interoperability between networks and between ledgers. So with that, I think we can jump over to this slide, and I really want to thank everybody for listening.